Hello, this is the second part of my video on the establishment of the Universal House of Justice. It comes from an old manuscript of mine, The Universal House of Justice in the Baha'i World, 1963 to 1973. As in the previous video, the primary source for this is the book Messages from the Universal House of Justice, 1963-1986, and if you don't have a copy of that, I would recommend you get one to look at it in proper detail. There's also an article which I co-wrote with Moojan Momen some years ago, which gives a background review of this period, and I'll give both of those references in the notes below the video. So, first of all, chronology. So 1963 sees a lot of important dates. April the 9th was the annual conclave of the Hands of the Cause beginning, and then the first international convention when the Universal House of Justice was first elected in the end of April, and then the World Congress in London shortly following that, and then the first public statement of the Universal House of Justice. All of this we covered in the previous video. Now we'll move on to the last part, mostly to talk about the House's first message to national Baha'i conventions on May the 7th, and then I'll briefly mention the message of the Hands of the Cause to national Baha'i conventions on May the 19th. So, following on from message of the House of Justice to the London Congress, which I mentioned in the previous video, the second major message that we have is one that it sent to national conventions in May 1963. This was shortly after the end of the Congress. Dated the 7th of May and addressed to the various national Baha'i conventions around the world, this message referred briefly to the organizational arrangements which the House had made for its own work, which I'll mention in a moment, and announced that a new plan of teaching and expansion would be launched in a year's time, so as to carry the faith forward on the next stage of its, quote, world-redeeming mission, specifying a number of tasks which the Baha'i should attend to in the meantime, so as to prepare for the plan. It also emphasized the importance and significance of the recent International Convention and the Congress, and the Universal House of Justice followed the example set by Shoghi Effendi and set contemporary developments in the faith in wider context. Of the two historic gatherings recently held, the first, the International Convention, had been unique and of untold and, quote, extreme spiritual and administrative significance, witnessing not only the election of the House of Justice, but the celebration of the Rezvan feast by some 300 Baha'is, daily visits to the Baha'i shrines by large groups of Baha'is of various backgrounds. The second event, the Congress, had been permeated by a spirit of, quotes, such bliss as could only have come from the outpourings of the heavenly kingdom, and had been a supreme occasion and, quote, the crowning victory of Shoghi Effendi's life work. Its outstanding features had included reviews of the progress of the Baha'i cause, the presentation of new Baha'is from new races and countries which had been reached during the 10-year crusade, and of the Knights of Baha'u'llah, who had taken his banner to the unopened and often inhospitable regions of the earth, and the meeting of the Baha'i, quotes, warriors, known to each other only by name and the service they had performed. I should note in passing that one of the questions I had on the previous video was the commonness or use of this military terminology, crusade, knights, warriors, which is just part of the Baha'i vocabulary. It doesn't have any military meaning. Other than that, we have, they mentioned the youth gatherings, the unprecedented publicity in the press and on television and radio, the daily stream of visitors to Shoghi Effendi's grave, and, quote, the radiant faces and heightened awareness of the true and real brotherhood of the entire human race within God's kingdom. The House also reaffirmed the tribute it had then paid to the hands of the cause of the Congress. These precious souls had brought the cause safely to victory in the Guardian's name. Thanks were also due to the auxiliary board members, the Knights of Baha'u'llah and other pioneers, the members of the national and regional assemblies, and Baha'is everywhere for their devoted services and their prayers and sacrifices. Together, they had attracted great bounties from Baha'u'llah. In terms of institutional arrangements, the House announced that it had already started its work, made the arrangements for its institutional establishment in Haifa, and decided not to have officers of its own. Henceforth, all its communications would be signed Universal House of Justice over an embossed seal. A further decision of major import was that the House would take over the former offices of the now defunct International Baha'i Council, expanding to take over the whole building of what had been the Western Pilgrim House, and thus occupying the whole of that space. In a message to the hands of the cause in the Holy Land, the House noted that it expected 8 of its 9 members to be settled in Haifa by the beginning of September. In October, the House announced that the next election for its own membership would take place during the spring of 1968, giving the existing members an initial 5-year term of office. The legal position of the House had also to be settled. Extensive consultations seem to have occurred between the House members and the Hands resident in Haifa after the ending of the London meetings. One important consequence was to remove from these Hands the legal title and function as custodians of the Baha'i world faith. That was the label under which they operated. The House of Justice now having assumed the headship of the faith. This decision was implemented on the 7th of June 1963, with statements ending the custodianship being issued by both the House and the custodial Hands. You can see details of those in the Ministry of the Custodians. I'll give a reference to that below. The remaining Hands were formally notified of this change by the Haifa Hands on the 14th of June. By that date, executive authority as managers of the Palestine or Israeli branches of various national assemblies had also been passed from the custodial Hands to the members of the House of Justice. This is a picture of the old Western Pilgrim House, which became used as the offices of, first of all, the International Baha'i Council, and then following that of the Universal House of Justice, until the building of its own separate seat sometime later. As to the Hands of the Cause, with the election of the House of Justice, the Hands of the Cause also amended aspects of their own functioning. Whilst the legal office of Custodians was to cease, a distinction was to continue to be made between the Hands resident in Haifa and the rest. The basic principles were established by the Hands as a whole during the London meeting. These were as follows. 1. 5 of the Hands were assigned to work in Haifa. These were responsible for coordinating the international work of the Hands as a collective body, both in relationship to the continental Hands and to the Universal House of Justice. 2. The Hands in Haifa needed a quorum of 3 to make decisions. At least 2 of the 3 were to be from the original 5 elected to serve in Haifa, but if necessary the 3rd could be one of the continental Hands reassigned to Haifa on a temporary basis after appropriate consultations with the other Hands. 3. If a vacancy occurred for any reason amongst the 5 Hands serving in Haifa, a replacement would be elected by the body of the Hands as a whole. 4. Meetings of the hands as a collectivity will be called by the Haifa hands after consultation with the rest. And 5, the Haifa hands, acting on behalf of the rest and in accordance with general instructions, would allocate whatever international funds were available for the work of the institution. Again, I'm drawing here from the book, The Ministry of the Custodians, which I'll refer to below the video. Addressing the annual Baha'i conventions worldwide on the 19th of May, the hands issued what might be seen as their valedictory message at the end of their period of leadership. The Baha'is, quote, heroic and dedicated efforts throughout the world had assured the, again, quote, triumphant conclusion of Shoghi Effendi's crusade. They, the hands, now desired to devote all their own efforts to the protection and propagation of the faith in accordance with their functions as laid down in the Baha'i texts, concentrating on the all-important work of teaching the faith. In their endeavors, the hands were sustained and uplifted by the establishment of the House of Justice as the faith's supreme edifice. They were confident that the spirit released during the Most Great Jubilee, that's the Congress, would inspire the Baha'is to arise to ensure that the unprecedented tide of victories, again quote, in the teaching field would continue. So, thank you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement. Without them, I wouldn't be able to make these videos. Please do like, comment, and share on the videos if you wish. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give a Patreon link below in case you want to provide practical support. Next week, we'll talk about the adoption of the Constitution of the Universal House of Justice. Have a good day.